first, chapter 8 is going to be categorical propositions, and then chapter 9 is going to be arguments involving categorical propositions. So, this is a particular kind of proposition. Now, it seems, that there are lots of kinds of proposition. There are conjunctions, for example, as a kind of proposition. That would be a proposition that contains the word and or an equivalent to and. But we don't have an entire chapter on conjunctions because they're not that logically interesting. But it turns out there are an awful lot of interesting logical facts about categorical propositions. And I think it was an assumption of the ancient Greeks, specifically Aristotle, who basically is the guy who kicked off logic, that most propositions can be stated as categorical propositions. We don't think that anymore, but certainly a large chunk of propositions are categorical. Okay. What is the number one most important fact about propositions? Yes, they have truth value. They are statements that are either true or false. That's what makes for a proposition, something with truth value. Okay, so what's a categorical proposition? Well, it turns out, I'll start with an example. All frogs are green. Who knows who Kermit is? Does anyone not know who Kermit is? Good, no one has been so hideously deprived as that. Well, Kermit, you may not know, if you know the more modern version of him, he had a big hit with a song called It's Not That Easy Being Green, or it was just called Being Green. Who is familiar with this song? Good. Did you know that it was covered by Frank Sinatra once? There you go. It's an odd song. It doesn't seem to really work as a song, but for some reason it was a big success. And I have a tape of this for my kids, honestly, that has a little preamble before it, where he says, I'm a frog, and frogs are green, so therefore I'm green, which is an example of what we would call a categorical syllogism, which is a two-premise argument involving categorical propositions. So I always use it as an example. This is an example of a categorical proposition. Why? Well, all categorical propositions have this feature. They feature two terms. Now, what are terms? Terms are categories of things. Categories, hence the name categorical propositions. What are the two groups of things in this case? Yes?
You have your premises and your subjects.
Well, wait a minute. You can't have a plural premise because, remember, a premise is a proposition. You would have to have an argument to have a premise. This is not an argument because it is a single proposition. So no premise is involved here. Now, specific to this example, what are the two groups in this sentence? Yes?
Frogs and green things.
Frogs and green things. Yes, that's good. I'm going to insist that when you put categorical propositions into what is called standard form, and I'll say more about that in a second, the predicate must be a class of things. And I will illustrate this by saying, imagine saying, here's a bag of blank. And if it makes sense, then it's okay. And if it doesn't make sense, then you need to do something about it. So if I just left it like this, I would say, here's a bag of green, which sounds kind of gross. Sounds like you've sneezed in a bag. What you need to say is green things. Okay, so those are the two groups, the two categories of things that are in all categorical propositions. These are the examples in this one. And we have a different name for each of these, which again should make sense for those of you who learned grammar. What two elements does every sentence have that you learned very early on? Subject and predicate. Well, we call this the subject term because it's what the proposition is about. That's what subjects are. And we call this the predicate term. Now, predicate in logic sometimes means property. And it's often true, although we've turned it into a class of things, in this case, green was a property. So it was saying, this proposition had truth value, could be true or false, because it was saying something about something. It was saying about frogs that they have this property. And that could be true or it could be false. So it's the having of a subject and predicate that allowed this proposition to have truth value and therefore be a proposition. Alright, so that's one feature of categorical propositions. They have these two categories. But they have two other features too. All categorical propositions have quantity. Now, quantity is how many members of the subject class we're talking about. Now, I'm going to abbreviate subject by S and predicate by P. Okay? So how many members of S, the categorical proposition, I'm going to abbreviate that as CP, I'm getting lazy here. How many members of S the CP is talking about? Now you might think that the quantity could be infinite then. You could be talking about an infinite number of things, you could be talking about a billion, you could be talking about a trillion, you could be talking about 37, you could be talking about 73. Sounds like you have an infinite degree of quantities, but the ancient Greeks simplified it down to 2, which I think is a lot less than infinite. And the two possibilities of quantity are all. You could either be talking about all members of the subject class, or less than that. Or fewer than all, I suppose I should say. Fewer members than all. That's it. Those are your two possibilities. Either you're talking about all, or you're talking about not all. What is a word that captures a quantity that is not all? Some. So basically all or some. Those are the two possibilities for the quantity of a categorical proposition. Now the other feature that categorical propositions have is quality. And qualities, like quantities, come in two flavors. Affirmative or negative. Depending on whether or not you're saying affirmative says members of S of a certain quantity are members of P. Negative says members of S of a certain quantity are not members of P. Alright, so those are the features. Two terms, a quantity and a quality. Turns out there are 4 possible types of categorical proposition. 4 types of categorical proposition. There's this row is where you're talking about all. We call that the universal. If you're on the top row, you are a universal categorical proposition. For the ones where you're not talking about all, we call that particular. So if you're in the bottom row, you are the quantity is particular. Okay, so this axis is the quantity. This axis is the quality. So if you're in this column, you're affirmative. I don't know why I'm writing, because my handwriting is so appalling you can't even read it, but it's just so you have some marker to remember the words that I said. And this is negative. There, I'll try a little harder this time. Alright, where do you think this one false? Universal affirmative, universal negative, particular affirmative, or particular negative?
Universal affirmative.
It's universal because of the word all, and it's affirmative because it's saying all frogs are, rather than all frogs are not. Okay, now we could abbreviate universe, or we could illustrate the form of categorical propositions by just taking away the content. The content is what this is actually about. Frogs and green things illustrates the content of this categorical proposition, what it's actually about. Let's take that away and we're left with all SRP. And that's the way to write a universal, that's the way to write the form of a universal affirmative categorical proposition. Okay? All SRP. How would you write a particular affirmative? Some SRP. There you go. How would you write a particular negative categorical proposition? Some S are not P. Good. Now, at the moment, you just have to bear with me. Because this kind of stuff, we're just classifying types of categorical proposition, and it's not immediately clear the point of this. The point is that it turns out there are interesting logical relationships amongst these types. And we'll get to that in a bit. But for now, we're just doing what seems like busy work, learning how to classify types of proposition. But hey, that's all biology is, so logic can't be worse than that. Using the same line of thought, what, and assuming you haven't looked at your book, so don't look at your book, what do you think the universal negative would look like? All S are not P. Yes, that would make sense, wouldn't it? So we're not going to do that. No, the reason why we would say that if we could, but unfortunately, it turns out that in English, all S are not P is ambiguous. It can mean what we want it to mean. What we want it to mean is that every single member of the subject class is not a member of the predicate class. That's what we want it to mean. But unfortunately, there is a way of using it which makes it sound like some members of the subject class are members of the predicate class. Imagine you're about to marry a lawyer, and I say, yeah, all lawyers are not dishonest. What do I appear to be saying? What it certainly seems to be an implication of what I'm saying. All lawyers are not dishonest.
Sounds like you're kind of saying that some or most lawyers are dishonest.
Yes. Right? Have you heard that used that way? All Chevys are not death traps, you know. That, I shouldn't say that in Flint of all places. All Fords, there you go, I'm allowed to say that. All Fords are not death traps. Who knows the story of the Ford Pinto? What's the story?
They had a gas tank in the back, and when you got rear-ended, it caused the car to explode.
Right. A minor design flaw, you might think. They're the ones used in all action movies, where, you know, the tiniest bump causes a fireball. And the shocking thing, of course, was that Ford knew about this years in advance and suppressed it, and kept selling them. And they made a calculation. They figure, well, eventually people are going to work this out and they'll sue us, but if we sell them for long enough, we'll have made enough money to cover it. So they made a calculation that a few dead people was worth it. That's car companies for you. What's that?
So they pay people to do exactly that calculation.
Yeah, that's true. Well, so now when we hear about General Motors and the ignition key, that's minor in comparison. Okay, so the trouble is all S are not P sounds like it means something that we don't want it to mean. Whereas there is a phrase in English that is unambiguous, and that is no S are P. That makes it clear that not a single member of S is also a member of the predicate class. The disadvantage of this is now we're introducing a third quantity word, and also we're not including the quality. This word here, or pair of words here, is called the copula. Why? Because it joins two things together, which is where we get the word copulate. But unfortunately, it would be nice if in both negative ones it was are not. But unfortunately, here this looks like it's an affirmative one because the copula is affirmative, but the negativity is now built into the quantity word. So it's kind of unfortunate that we have to do that, but we do, and that's the way it's done. All right, so you can't just look at the copula and work out whether or not it's affirmative or negative. So those are the 4 types of categorical proposition. And one more classification fact. We abbreviate these types using the vowels, A, E, I, and O. So an A-type categorical proposition is universal affirmative. An E-type is universal negative, an I-type is particular affirmative, and an O-type is particular negative. Okay? Why do they do this? Well, apparently it's because the Latin for I affirm is affirmo, and the first 2 vowels of that are A and I. And the Latin for I negate is nego, and the first 2 vowels for that are E and O. Who cares? Just remember the vowels, all right? Okay. Let's see if we can identify categorical propositions. Turn to page 199. Ethan, I believe we got as far as you. Could you read the first one, please?
Some baseball players are not golfers.
Give me a vowel.
Well, some. I'm sorry, that's not a vowel at all.
That is not a vowel. It contained a
I
vowel.
was thinking noun.
It contained actually the right vowel.
I would say that that's O.
And you would be correct. Because it's particular because of the word some, and it's negative because of the word not. So what is the predicate class in that case?
Predicate class is. Yeah, what a predicate class is.
It's P.
Golfers. Oh, the predicate class that are not golfers.
No, golfers. You're right. Now, so the predicate class is golfers, not golfers, because the not is not included in the predicate class. The not is outside of the predicate class. The predicate class is whatever goes where P is, which is after the word not. So what's the subject class?
Baseball players.
That's right. Okay, who's next? Done.
All graduate students are scholars. A.
Very good. Number 3. Chris is not here. Hunter.
Some movie stars are good actors.
George Clooney.
E.
Why would you say that? Why would you make me cry like that, Hunter?
Never mind.
Remember, it starts with the word some, so that tells you it's particular. So that tells you it's I or O.
I.
Why is it I?
Some movie stars are good actors. It has some.
So it's I or O,
Yeah.
and it doesn't have the word not, so it's I. You are correct. What is the predicate class in that case, Hunter?
Actors.
No. What is the predicate class?
Good.
Good actors, right? You got to include everything that's part of the predicate class. It's not saying that some movie stars are actors, it's saying that some movie stars are good actors. Harder to beat. Number 4. Brandon.
Do you mean? Oh, wait, no.
It's Brandon, sorry. Yes, it is O. Some movie stars are not good actors. Alright, Brandy. I see the confusion. Number 5.
No, self-respecting person is a snob. E.
Okay, and what is the subject class?
Self-respecting person.
Yeah, I'm going to say make it plural because it's a class of things. So it'd be self-respecting people. Yeah. Alright, those are easy. Let's skip ahead to, sorry Zainab, we're going to make it harder just for you, is page 202. Now it turns out that, just to make things interesting, All of the ones you were doing in the previous exercise were in what is called standard form. That is, standard form is looking like this. That is, beginning with the word all, some, or no, and no other word, and having the verb be are, and having the predicate class be a class of things. That's what it is to be in a standard form. However, you can convey the information of one of these four in non-standard ways. And so what you have to get good at is converting the non-standard ones into one of the four standard forms. And that's what we're going to do now. So, number one is fairly easy. You only have to make one minor change. Saying, what is the type for the first one? A. All human beings are rational. What is the one alteration you have to make? Put that in. What's that? As it's written, it's not quite in standard form. In fact, you should be reminded of the one we started out with, because I had to make one minor change to that. Yes, that's right. In other words, because the predicate class, if I were to ask you what the predicate class as written, it's rational. And that's not a group of things. You know, you can't say, here's a big bag of rational, right? You have to add the word things. In other words, if it's just an adjective, as rational is, you have to turn it into a class of things. No, don't. Things is fine. In fact, always use the word things. Don't get fancy with your noun. Just use things.
So
Okay.
What did she say? I didn't hear what she said.
All human beings are rational things. That's the one change you have to make. It's an A type.
Why can't it be?
Rational humans?
Yeah, why can't it be rational people?
Because that's kind of cheating. We want to be making a claim that could be... It should be the case that this is possibly false, that you're saying something that is genuinely informative. But if I said all human beings, well, no, it would be informative because it's rational humans. But we don't want. It's just.
Just don't do it.
I don't want to just say that because that's not very informative. But I'll say something that's almost as bad, which is why will become clear later. It's what you tell your kids and they hate you for it. The reason why will become clear later, but certainly do not import the noun from the subject class. Don't take, the subject class is human beings, so take human beings and plug that into. Don't do that. Just use things. Things is simple. Let's keep it simple. Now, it can sound stupid, but that's okay. Logic doesn't care about sounding stupid, it just cares about being clear. All right. Number 2. Jacob.
Term is I, and
You mean the type is I?
the type, sorry.
Yes.
The type is I, and some skiers are things who are out of control.
Yes. So you turn the predicate class into a class of things. All right, number 3. Who's back there? Samantha.
Nobody's perfect.
Ain't it the truth? Now, what type is that, first of all? E. Yes. Do you need glasses? Because you kind of look like you're squinting there. It is E. Okay, so if it is E, then it will be this. It will be no, and then the subject class. What is the subject class in this case? No. Don't say body, because it's not actually talking about bodies. Yeah, or the plural being people. So the subject class here is kind of unstated. It's people, but it certainly is what we're talking about. So no, people are perfect things. Yes. So it's no, people are perfect things. Again, it doesn't sound half as nice as nobody's perfect, but it is logically clear, and that's what we care about. Number 4. Yes, Philip. Read that out first.
A family that plays together stays together.
Or they just get mad at each other, depending on how bad they are at losing. We had to lose to our kid at board games for the longest time. Now, this starts with the word A, and the word A is tricky because you can have some propositions that start with the word a that are particular. For example, if I were to say, I talk a lot about whales in this class. I don't know why. I like whales. Whales are cool. Apparently whale poop will save the oceans because it has some bacteria in it that eat the kind of algae that's, you know, making the world poisonous. So more whales. Whales are good. Here's an example of a categorical proposition. A whale beached itself today in San Francisco Bay. What type is that? A, E, I, or O? It is I. Now notice I says some whales, and you think, but he just said a whale. That's okay, because we're not, are we talking about all whales? No. Well, in that case, we're talking about some. Some can be any number from 1 to 1 fewer than all. Okay? So if I said a whale beached itself today in San Francisco Bay, it would be an I type. However, what if I were to say a whale is a mammal? What type is that? It's A. But it's singular. I just said a whale is. Why is that talking about all whales? Well, I know, but I just said a whale is a
You're
mammal.
not talking about specific whale.
Right. Why not?
It's implied that you're talking about, like you're using one whale as like sort of the template for the rest of them.
Yes, I'm talking about, so in that case I'm talking about a generic whale. So think of both of those sentences. After the first one, it might make sense to say, oh no, was it Keiko? Right? Because I love Keiko. Is Keiko still alive? Keiko was in SeaWorld or Willie. Willie was free, so it'd be tragic if he was beached later. You know, it would make sense to ask that question about the whale that was beached. But, you know, if I said, a whale is a mammal, was it Keiko? That's the wrong kind of question to ask, because when you say a whale, you're not really talking about any specific whale. You're talking about what you might call a generic whale. What does the word generic mean?
Run-of-the-mill sort of whale.
A run-of-the-mill. Joe Public whale, right? Joe Six-Pack whale. That's right. That is a whale that could be a generic, whatever we're talking about, in this case whale, is something that is not distinctive in any way. So anything true of that particular example will be true of all of them. So it just happens to be true that in English, and probably some other languages too, you can make general claims that appear to be singular claims, because you're talking about a generic example. So a whale is a mammal means really any whale is a mammal, which means all whales are mammals. So, long story short, the word a doesn't tell you the quantity. You have to kind of work out the quantity. What do you work out the quantity is in this case, Philip? Universal or particular?
I'm leaning towards universal.
Are you going to go all the way? Are you going to commit?
I don't like doing that very much.
Well, you have to. You're forced to.
Okay, universal.
And universal it is. That's right. Good job. Why? Why is universal the right answer?
Because it's talking about like a generic family.
In other words, you're saying that any family that does this.
Yeah.
Now, all right, here's another hard question. What is the subject class here? All what? Yes, not just families. We're not making a general claim about all families. We're making a general claim about all families that play together. All right, so that's the subject class. So this is an A type. All families that play together are, what's the predicate?
Families that
Now,
Things that stay together.
things that stay together, yes. I know that sounds stupid, but too bad. I'm going to force you to be stupid. Logic is a special kind of stupid. Now let's skip over number 5. It's boring. Number 6. Jordan.
John F. Kennedy was not successful in his casting plays.
Policy, yes. What is different about that example from all the ones we've been doing?
It's about a specific person.
It's about one individual and one specific individual. Now, we've had examples that were about one non-specific individual, like a whale beaching itself in San Francisco Bay, but we haven't had an example about a specific, in this case, a proper name. John F. Kennedy. What number president was he? I don't have to know that. It's not my president. You don't know what number president. So what number president are we on? What is Barack Obama?
43rd.
Now, is he 43rd and 42nd?
No, it's just the 43rd.
Okay, so it's not in terms of terms. So work backwards and you can probably work out Kennedy. While you're doing that, there are two ways we could treat this. We could treat this as particular, because after all it's one, or we could treat it as universal. Which do you think we should? Universal, you are right. Why?
Because it's everything that he did. Like, we're only talking about him as a specific person.
Yes, our subject class is John F. Kennedy. How many John F. Kennedys are there? One. How many of them are we talking about? One. We're talking about all one of him. So it is a universal claim. That's right. So when you're talking about a class of one, it's going to be universal, because you're talking about the whole one. So now we have to ask, is it A or E?
Is it
A little voice in your head just said that. Yes, it is E. Well, there are two ways you could go. The subject class is John F. Kennedy. You could say all John F. Kennedys are things that are unsuccessful in their foreign policy. That would be an A type. Where the predicate class would be things that are unsuccessful. Or you could say that it's an E type because you could say no, John F. Kennedy was a thing that was successful. Which is the right way? Well, the right way is to, if there is negativity, it should be exposed in the quality. It shouldn't be used to define the term. So if I said things that are unsuccessful, I'm building in the negativity into my description of a class. That's not usually a good thing to do. I mean, it's just not informative. Like, suppose I were to tell you, I'm thinking of a class of things. And you say, well, what are you thinking of? And I said, things that are not chairs. Right? That's just not informative. Your class of things should always be defined positively, except in cases where that's impossible because they're essentially negative. But in most cases, the negativity shouldn't be built into the definition of the term. It should be out in the open. It should be exposed in the quality. So this is an E type. And if you said it in standard form, it would be no, John F. Kennedys are
successful in domestic policy?
things that are successful in domestic policy. Yes. How are we doing time? Oh, yeah. Blessed are the meek. Eric.
I'd say it's
An A type. Who agrees? Come on, shall we go? Yes. Okay. So all what? Eric. What's that?
plus.
So you say the subject is what?
Plus.
First of all, blessed is an adjective. So that cannot be, here's a big bag of blessed.
And it's saying like blessed people.
Well,
That would be the subject.
it would be blessed things.
Or the meaning.
And what's wrong with saying blessed things is the subject? What's the mistake there?
Less describes the meat.
So, in other words, if I were to ask you, Eric, what is this sentence about? Or who is this sentence about?
Me.
The meek. And if it's about them, they are the
Subject.
subject. So what's tricky about this sentence?
The subject is at the end.
The subject is the end. The order has been switched. Who would do such a diabolical thing? Well, where does this come from?
The Bible.
The Bible. Be more specific.
Book of...
Oh, you are getting specific. I was going to say which testament, first of all.
New.
There's only two. New. The New Testament. All right, what part of the New Testament? See, this is what happens when you separate church and state. I had to learn this in school. We have required religious education. It's the Beatitudes, the Sermon on the Mount.
So
Actually, I know this.
Mark and Matthew.
All right, you're getting into way more detail than I know. No, actually, the main reason I know this is because of Monty Python's Life of Brian. That I will give examples from Monty Python because this is actually required if you're English. But Monty Python is like a famous group of comedians that came out in the late 60s, early 70s. They produced a bunch of movies. The most popular over here for some reason is Holy Grail. But I think their best movie is The Life of Brian. It was more controversial because it has Jesus in it. And people thought that they were mocking Jesus. But as they said in a series of interviews, no, we're not mocking Jesus. What they were mocking was organized religion, which of course pisses a lot of people off too. But the only time Jesus appears in the movie is he's off in the distance giving the Sermon on the Mount, which is famous for blessed are the meek. For they shall have the earth for their possession or something. And the joke in the movie is the people are far away and they can't quite hear what he's saying. And they say, what does he say? Blessed are the cheesemakers? And then they try to make sense. Why would he say the cheesemakers? There must be something in this. Yes, this is from the Sermon on the Mount. And actually, if you were to say it was from, even if you were to say it was from whatever specific book it's from, you still have to make one more qualification. It's from which version of the Bible?
The English version?
Yes, a particularly famous English version.
James.
The King James Bible, which is called the King James Bible because it was ordered by King James, who became king in 1601 when Shakespeare was still living and writing. And actually Shakespeare does a similar thing. It is a poetic way of speaking from the 17th century. We don't do that anymore unless we want to sound like punters. You don't flip this around, but it is a poetic way of speaking. It turns out actually people love the King James Bible because this sounds cool. It sounds cool, it sounds very poetic. But actually the King James Bible, if you want strict accuracy to the original text as we know, King James Bible is pretty crappy. They were working from a not very good translation of a translation of a translation, and there's a ton of errors in it. But people love it because it sounds awesome. It sounds like Shakespeare. And in fact, the people who were hired by King James to do this translation weren't particularly good translators, but they were good writers. So they came up with wonderful phrases. And our language is peppered with phrases from the King James Bible that we don't even know. There's all kinds of phrases that are used in everyday English that come directly from the King James Bible. So it's great. But it does this thing. Blessed are the meek. If you were to put this in standard form, it's an A type, so we would say all meek things
are blessed. Are blessed.
Things, yes. So you have to do things twice in this case. That's right. Or you could say all the meek are blessed things. All right. Number 8, not so much fun, but we'll do it anyway. Destiny.
The political party that wins a presidential election can expect to lose
Congressional seats. About to happen. You will see this principle confirmed later this year. Okay, what type is that? A, E, I, or O? Are we making a general claim, or are we talking about a particular instance? So it's just true of some political parties that win a presidential election? Oh, okay, so what type is it? A type. So all, what's the subject class? Is it just political parties? Are we talking? Yes. So the subject class is political parties that win a presidential election. All of them are.
expected to lose congressional seats 2 years later.
What am I going to object to about that?
No, no.
There's no now. So here's a big bag of expected to lose, right? You have to say what word? Things. That's right. All political parties that win on a presidential election are things that can expect to lose congressional seats 2 years later. All right.